I went on a missions trip last year. You remember me going on a missions trip last year? I went with his cousin, Mark Abernathy, in Martinsville. I went with their church, and we went to Belize, and we helped them build a church building in Belize. Brother Abernathy's going to be here Thursday. I really want our men, we've never done anything like that, never. But I really want us to consider doing a project like that. Now, so you don't have to know how to build a building. The way that they do these buildings, one group will go in and frame it and put the siding and the roof on, and then another group will come in and do electrical and maybe put some interior work in and just do different things there. It takes 2 or 3 churches usually to come in and do that. And Brother Abernathy's church, they did fundraisers. So they made it kind of fun. In the church, they did fundraisers to pay for it. You can fly Southwest Airlines to Belize, so it's not expensive. It's real missions work. We were in a jungle, stopped one day and saw a snake by the side of the road, a viper, some kind of jungle viper, that if it bit you, you wouldn't be able to get into town before you died. I mean, it's in the jungle. It's amazing. But it's also in the Caribbean, and so it's amazing. And we went swimming, and I killed a lobster and a crab with a spear gun, and I pulled up probably 5 or 6 starfish off the bottom of the. We just had a blast, and we went to church on a Sunday morning, and we built this little building that was the sanctuary was maybe this big, not quite, but just about one section. And they had little park bench-like things for wooden pews. And we thought, there'll probably be 30 or 40 people show up here. And I'm telling you, people came, and they came, and they came, and they came, and they kept coming. And they filled up every seat and lined the walls. And I'll bet there were 150 people in that little building. Man, it was just incredible to be there with them. So Brother Abernathy will be here Thursday night. So it'll be a great time. He'll do a great job. He's a great missionary. He has gone to Belize and just systematically built little churches and villages all over the country of Belize. And he's doing a great job there. So I'd like to go help him build another building. I'd like for our men to go. I think as much as we give to missions, it would be a good thing to go and spend 4 or 5 days, and just so you could kind of catch. It will change your view of missions if you are able to do that. So that's my sales pitch, y'all. But I want our men to consider. Some of you might say, I don't know how to build, or I've never built anything. I don't know how to do. You know what? A lot of the fellas that went with us don't have any building experience, no construction experience at all. Some of them were office guys. We'll have enough men who will know what needs to be done. We would probably go in and do finish work, like run all the electrical and put siding on the inside of a room. And there are enough of us that do know how to do that, we could train the monkeys to enjoy their time too. Brother Prestwood's got 2 thumbs up, so he's ready to go. And we would have a great time. It would be a lot of fun. And once we decide that we definitely want to do something like that, we'll talk about it, and I'll explain to you all about where we stay and what we do. And it's amazing. It really is amazing. So we'd have a great time. But this morning we're talking about pleasing the Lord, discipleship. Part of what we want to be in our walk with God is we need to learn to walk humbly. And we're going to talk about walking humbly this morning. Luke chapter 14, verse 11. The Bible said, For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. This chapter, the 14th chapter of the book of Luke, tells a story when Jesus was invited to the meal, or to the home of a leading Pharisee. In the first verse of chapter 14, he was invited to the home of this Pharisee for a meal. A supper like this was typically modeled after a Roman banquet, and it would last for hours. Meals were, when you were invited and it was a supper or a meal like that, it was quite a social event. There was no assigned seating. Nobody had a special seat. Every guest arrived, and when they got there, they chose where they were going to sit. So sitting near the host was considered significant because it gained people attention. You were able to see what was going on. So after Jesus had accepted the invitation, he watched, and what he saw was, Luke chapter 14 and verse 7 explains to us that Jesus saw self-exaltation on display. Pride, self-interest, the ambition of the Pharisees showed as they chose seats near the host. Sitting near the host really didn't add any value. Jesus' disciples even had a problem with wanting to sit closer to the Jesus. It was really more of a petty distraction than anything else. But other people would notice where they were sitting, and so that was important. Jesus watched. The Bible lets us know he was kind of watching as the meal progressed, and the host had an agenda for what was going on. He wanted it known that important people had attended his supper. So he would begin to rearrange the seating to bring important people up to sit near him. If the host saw somebody important sitting at a low seat, he'd have a servant ask that guest to move closer to the host. Sometimes there was a complication, somebody already occupied that higher seat, and you had to move them and ask them to move because somebody more important needed their seat. So there was assessment that was placed on your importance based on all of that. So he felt he was important. This person sitting in that high seat had made a self-assessment. I think I'm important sitting here. So he deserved that lofty place. But the host, as master of the feast, was the one that determined what guests were the most important there. So a servant would be sent then to speak to whoever now sat in this closer seat. And the message was, move. There's somebody else that the master of the feast wants to sit close to him. And as other people watched, then the guest who had been told to move would stand, and he would move farther down the table away. It was humiliating if you thought you were more important than what you really obviously were in the eyes of the person that was there. He had overestimated his significance, and now all that remained were these seats of low esteem and low value. His arrogant self-assessment didn't match the value that was placed on him by the master of the feast. Luke 14:11 ends a parable. Whoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. It's important to be humble. It is important. But humility is often misunderstood. If we understand, if we're going to understand what Jesus was teaching, it requires clarity on what humility is not before we can figure out what humility really is. I think one of the first things we got to understand is humility is not minimizing our abilities. I'm usually not impressed by the aw shucks crowd. Oh, I don't know if I can do that. And then the guy takes the football and throws it 15 straight times through the hole, right? Oh, I'm not impressed by that. That's false humility, That's more about not being humble than it is about being humble. He's trying to throw you off and make you think that he's not really what he knows he really is. Humility's not minimizing our abilities. It's not presenting ourselves as inadequate. Humility's not poor little me. That's not what humility is. We're not prideful if we feel good about the work that we do, whether it's on the job or at church. We're not prideful if we say, this is the best suit I've got, so I'm going to put it on and I'm going to wear it to church to honor God. It might be prideful if I say to Brother Odell, you like my suit? I paid $700 for this bad boy. I did not. I would never pay $700 for a suit. But if I walked up to Brother Odell, or Brother Odell walked up to me and he said, man, I really like that suit. Yeah, it cost me $700. I bought it at Kohl's, y'all. It's a separate. I think I paid $30 for the pants and $50 for the jacket. And that's the first new suit I bought in ages. Most of the time I buy my suits at a consignment shop. That means somebody else owned them before. That's not humility, me telling you that I buy used suits. That's smart. That's smart. That's not humble. By me saying, Brother Anderson, I buy all my suits used because the church doesn't pay me enough to be able to buy a $700 suit. That's just smart. And I'm proud that I'm smart enough to know the difference between, you can't tell whether it's a $700 suit or not, you know, but it's the best one that I got, so I wore it to church this morning to honor God. So belittling ourselves, we're not prideful if we feel good about the work that we do. It's not prideful to be like that. So here's, if we completed this sentence, it kind of gives us perspective. I'm good at whatever it is I'm good at. And then if we complete this sentence, it kind of broadens the perspective. I'm bad at. Proud people pretend to be good at everything. But being humble is not downplaying our success and focusing on our failure. Neither approach is correct, folks. Neither one's correct. Humility is not being unable to accept a compliment. Now, and I'll be honest with you, I don't like compliments, but it's just because, it's not because I'm humble. It's because my mindset is I got a job to do, and I'm going to do that job, and I'm going to plod along, and it's my job. So you don't need to pat me on the back and tell me I'm doing a good job. I just don't like all that. That's all. That's my personality. I'm also the guy that is much more content sitting at home by myself than being at the feast that Jesus was at. That doesn't mean I'm humble either. That means I like my home. I am king in my castle. You know? And I like being home. Me and Little Feather. My wife, next week, I'm taking my wife to the Badlands. She's not going. She says she's not going. It's not next week. It's the week after next. We're going up around the Badlands. So we found out as we're deciding to go up there, the Pawnee grasslands are up there. And on the Marshall side of her family, there's Pawnee Indian in them. So I'm taking Little Feather home in a couple of weeks. Pray for me that when I get her up there that she doesn't stay, she'll come back. We're going to the Pawnee grasslands, and then we're going to Yellowstone, and then we're going over to the Badlands. And so I'll be up around bison and wolves and coyotes and Pawnee Indians. I just hope Little Feather comes home with me. So pray that she'll come home with me. I took her to the south rim of the Grand Canyon a few years ago, and there were teepees there. And the south rim of the Grand Canyon is that one where they got that big glass thing that stretches out over the Grand Canyon. You can walk out and stand over the Grand Canyon. She wasn't one bit interested in standing over the Grand Canyon. She was walking through the teepees. I said, come on. She said, leave me alone. I want to see what's going on in here. And then she started doing this. I don't know what that was all about. So I went and looked at the Grand Canyon and let her play in the teepees. We're going to have fun. I'm going to have fun. She's going to get mad at me. So, but let's get back to our lesson. Humility is not being unable to accept a compliment. Responding to a compliment with, oh, you're just saying that. That's not necessarily being humble. Sometimes a response like that can be false modesty. It's like, oh, you're just saying that. And then somebody gets to say, and we say that because then they'll have to say, no, I really mean it. That's amazing. Oh, you're just saying that. No, you're really good at that. So instead of just getting a compliment one time, I got a compliment 3 times. So that's not necessarily humility either. We've got to understand a little bit. Humility is also not low self-esteem. The redemptive work that Jesus did in us establishes our worth, folks. Humility is not feeling worthless. That's not humility. I'm going to tell you right now, in humility, I'm valuable to God. Not because I'm a pastor or a preacher, but he saw value in me because he died on Calvary to redeem me. So he saw value in you because he died on Calvary to redeem you. So this idea that I'm not worth it, that's not humility. That's not. Humility is not feeling worthless. Humble people can be ambitious. We should envision a better future for ourselves and for our families. Christian living does not require poverty of mind, spirit, or body. Christians can feel good about themselves and who they are in Christ Jesus. So what's it mean then if humility is not minimizing our abilities, and it's not being unable to accept a compliment, and if it's not low self-esteem? True humility is not thinking less of yourself. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. True humility is thinking of yourself less. Real humility is learning to think. Pride and self-interest and self-promotion causes us to want attention. Those same things expose us to embarrassment and humiliation. Proud people bruise easily. That's why Wayne Turner made me learn Proverbs 16 and 18 when I was in the junior class. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proud people bruise easy. They get their feelings hurt real easily. By contrast, behaving with humility is the sure way never to suffer that kind of humiliation. When we talk about humility, or when somebody talks about humility, George Glass Sr. was a minister with the United Pentecostal Church. He said, you take a low road to a high place. We can never overestimate our own significance. We can never overestimate our own significance. When in that parable of the meal in Luke chapter 14, when people were seated as the host wanted, the arrangement showed how he felt about each attendee. An unassuming person might now be in a place of prominence. You never could tell. So let's look at just beyond watching what's going on. Jesus then instructed his audience in Luke 14 on how to respond. When thou art bidden, he said, go and sit down in the lowest room. Jesus taught us that presuming that we are important is a mistake, regardless of how we see ourselves. Instead, in cases like this meal where Jesus observed everybody who thought they were more important than what they were, we're supposed to go and sit down in the lowest room and decide not to join the competition to be noticed. If the host wants to elevate us, it'll happen in good time. If we humble ourselves, we will be exalted. If we exalt ourselves, we will be made abased. Jesus said, start out without thinking that you are the most important person in the room. That's what Jesus said. Decide that we're not going to join that competition to be noticed. If the host wants to, it'll happen in due time. in the competitive world, Jesus taught, for whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased. Whosoever humbleth himself shall be exalted. Several lessons can be gleaned from this parable that Jesus is talking to us about. Here's some things to write down or take note of or highlight in your lesson page. We got one more lesson in this book, and then we get the new lessons. But a lot of people, a lot of lessons can be gleaned from the parable that Jesus taught. Now, somebody said, man, brother, this isn't spiritual. What are you teaching this for? This isn't spiritual. This is spiritual. This is spiritual because when we exalt ourselves to the point that we really think we're something and we really think that we have a great value, we can esteem our value well beyond where the grace of God can take us. Sometimes if we esteem our value higher than what we really are, there are some people that I'd like to buy for what they're worth and sell them for what they think they're worth. I do pretty well. I know a lot of people like that. I shouldn't say that. I know a few people that I'd like to buy for what they're really worth and sell them for what they think they're worth. We've got to understand that if we let pride get in our way, the New Testament writer, Paul said this as he was influenced by the Holy Ghost, that there are three things that are going to take us down: the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. The pride of life, as you study it and you look at it and you think about it, the pride of life directs and dictates both of the other issues that are major problems in our lives. It's pride that causes the lust of the eye and the lust of the flesh to be able to operate in our lives. When we allow pride to begin to take over, we lose the ability for the Spirit to lead us and guide us. When pride begins to take over in our lives, we don't think we need God's help as much. Proud people don't too often sing, I need thee, oh, I need thee, every hour I need thee. So we got to be careful that we don't let pride get in the way, because this is a spiritual aspect of life. We've got to learn humility to walk with God. Jesus Christ was the most important person that ever walked the face of the earth, folks. He was God manifest in flesh. He wasn't just a second person in a Godhead. He was God manifest in the flesh. And the Bible said he humbled himself and made himself a little lower than the angels. He became just like us to redeem us. He did see value in us, but he saw value in us as we submit ourselves to his plan and his purpose for our life. And by submitting himself to the eternal plan of salvation for mankind, God robed himself in flesh, and he who was without sin became sin for us. And he humbled himself, and he died on the cross. He died on a cross, the worst, the most humiliating death that could take place in that day. Jesus died that death to buy our salvation. So when Jesus is teaching us a lesson about humility, listen up. And so this parable in Luke 14, he's talking to us, and there are some things that we can learn. People who overestimate their importance put themselves at the risk of being humiliated. Second thing that we can learn, Jesus taught us, if you humble yourself, you will be exalted. If you exalt yourself, you will be abased. So the second thing we can learn was promotion comes to the humble. Promotion will come. Humility is a personal choice. We either choose to be arrogant or we choose to be humble. How the master sees us is far more important than how we see ourselves. because the master of this meal was the one who chose where people were seated. I might have thought I belonged somewhere else. I would be much better off to sit at the far end of the table and be called forward than to sit right beside him and then be told, hey, you need to move on down. I got more important people here than you. Right? It's always better to be said, hey, come on up here. Come a little higher. That's what Jesus does when he saves us. He says, hey, come up a little higher. I've got better things for you. I've got a greater walk for you. I've got stability for you. I've got peace that you can't bring to your own life. Jesus uses the phrase, shall be. That indicates a passage of time. He that humbleth himself shall be exalted. And he that exalteth himself shall be abased. Did I say that backwards? He that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Shall be. So when Jesus is talking here in Luke 14:11, and he uses that phrase, shall be, it indicates a passage of time. Humility in our lives has got to make us understand that a humbling of a proud person may not come quickly. Because judgment is not executed speedily, the Old Testament writer said. We lose faith in things, but it will always come. It always will come. In the same instance, a humble person's elevation may not happen overnight, but it will happen. It will happen. And the last thing that I think we can take from what Jesus is telling us here is that self-promotion seems to be the norm among people. So the question we got to ask is does that please God when I promote myself? I don't believe it does. We can't think that manipulation or ingenuity or even aggressiveness for personal gain are things that are pleasing God. God determines who sits in places of significance. I was talking to somebody the other day, and you know me. I hope you know me. I've held a license with the United Pentecostal Church for 35 years. I got licensed 35 years ago. And in those 35 years, when we left here and went to New Palestine, I resigned an elected office in the district because I left one section and moved to another section. And I was in New Pal for 3 years. And then when we came back here, I was elected to an office again. And I have held an office, an elected office, in the United Pentecostal Church, in a district or nationally. All but 3 years of the 35 years that I've held. And Brother Hunt never held an office. Not one. Never held any office. And he pushed me and encouraged me. He told me, if the brethren ever feel like there's something in you that's worthy of you holding an office, you better take it. You never have. They've never elected me. They've never asked me to serve. But if they ask you to serve, you should serve. So, okay, that's what I'll do. So, I've been a sectional youth director. I've been a sectional home mission. Not lofty positions, all of them. I've been a sectional home missions director. I've been the district home missions secretary. I've been the district home missions director. I've been the national home missions director of the year. I've been a presbyter on the district board. I've been the camp controller, and I've been the national church in a day director. Toot toot. Right? I was talking to somebody the other day. When I stand before God in heaven at the great white throne of judgment, God's not going to say, what an impressive list of elected offices you have held within the United Pentecostal Church. Come on in. He's going to say, well done, thou good. If I get to hear him say it, that's what I'm striving for. He's going to say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. That's what he's going to say. So I told this person the other day, they were saying, oh, there's all this talk about we're going to have a conference. Maybe if this COVID thing all dies down and this office and that, would you do this or would you serve in that? Would you take this? Oh, I've done it. I'm done. I really, please don't do that to me. Please don't. I'm just happy being Pastor Long now. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Well, I think you seem like you'd be the man. And I said, look, when it all boils down to it, here's where I'm at, bro. I would hate to think that after 35 years of ministry, really more than that, but 35 years of licensed ministry with the United Pentecostal Church, that the value of my ministry was predicated on whether or not I held an elected position or not. God help them if they value or devalue my ministry by whether or not I held an elected position. Because that's not what I'm called to do. I do that because I'm asked to serve. And I thank God that I have the ability to be able to do that. I don't think it's wrong to be proud of the fact that I have the ability to organize people and build a building. Sister Donna? A couple years ago, some of you may not know, a couple years ago we had a business meeting. And in the business meeting, we decided we were going to build a fence around the daycare playground. And I said, well, we need to get a fence contractor, and we need to get somebody to come in here who knows what they're doing to build a fence and build a fence. And she thought she was funny. I got my eye on her now, though. I watch her. I'm very cautious in business meetings that Sister Donna didn't get an opportunity to be able to speak. She raised her hand. She said, Brother Long, if you can build a church in a day, you can't build a fence? Everybody laughed. Everybody thought Sister Donna was funny. That humbled me, right? That humbled me. So this humility thing, we've got to understand that we can take pride in what we do. We can and still be humble. But we've got to be careful that our pride doesn't take us to a point of self-interest and self-promotion. And we've got to look and see what Jesus is looking at. True humility. Let's look at Psalm 75, 6 and 7. Promotion cometh neither from the east or from the west or from the south, but God's the judge, and he puts down one, and God sets up another. God does that. God does that in his kingdom. I got a 25-minute story on all that here at this church, but I don't have time to tell it this morning. You've heard it all 15 times anyway. So when we're talking about just going beyond watching what's going on, true humility operates counterculturally, folks. Jesus' second lesson that he was talking about in Luke chapter 14 and verse 11 is countercultural. In Jesus' day, a banquet host could expect a return invitation from his guests. If I invite you, then you're going to invite me, and that's a big deal. Being a Pharisee was a very exclusive club. So basically what happened is parties moved from house to house to house. Jesus wanted something different. Jesus, if you read down to the 13th verse of the 14th chapter of Luke, Jesus said, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind. Don't just call people who you can put pictures in the paper and say, these people came to my party and we had a big time. Jesus said there are people who really have needs that could come to these events, and those needs could be ministered to with all of the stuff that you've got here. Jesus was all about meeting people's needs. These suppers had two types of measurements. Where somebody sat was evaluated, and the people that attended were evaluated. Jesus now addresses the Pharisees' desire of having it known that important people had attended their supper. Jesus taught them that they should intentionally humble themselves with people that we associate with. Wayne Huntley is one of my favorite preachers. I love to hear Brother Huntley. Wayne Huntley went to Charlotte, North Carolina, and lived in a borrowed motorhome, a trailer, for years when he started his church. It's not criticism; that's just what he did. He lived in a borrowed. He didn't even own it, a borrowed trailer, and he went around and taught Bible studies to everybody. Bible studies every night. He taught Bible studies, and he won people, and he built a church, and but he was winning poor folks. Folks that didn't have any money, folks that weren't really going to be a huge financial blessing to the church. And he prayed and he said, God, I need doctors and attorneys and business owners. I need some of those people in the church that have got some money so we can buy property and build a building. And he said the Lord spoke to him. And the Lord told him that if he would love the people that nobody wanted, that God would give him the people everybody wanted. That's a lesson in humility for us. We shouldn't judge people. If we really are humble, we're not going to judge people. I don't preach. I don't preach messages and ever think, oh, I got to be careful because so-and-so pays a lot of tithe, and if I preach this and I get under their skin, they might leave. God help us if we think that way. God help us if we ever minister that way. God help us if that thought ever comes into our mind. We've got to love everybody, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, what the color of their skin is, whether they don't have any color at all. We've got to love everybody. Jesus taught us, Jesus called for humility. He was telling them back in that day, in the Pharisees, nobody chose the maimed, nobody chose the poor, nobody chose them. Some people say in the Western world, anybody can succeed. You just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The problem in the day we live in, some folks don't have any bootstraps to pull themselves up by. I mean, that's just the world that we live in today. So we've got to be intentional about what we do. People that walk humbly before the Lord reach beyond their comfort zone. Now, I'm just talking to you this morning. Somebody else is going to preach in a little while, and they're going to rear back and hammer hard, and you can shout and say amen. I'm just talking to you this morning. Luke chapter 14 and verse 13, Jesus said, when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind. People that walk humbly before the Lord intentionally connect with folks that are disadvantaged. Jesus didn't say to his audience, give these unfortunate people the leftovers. People with an attitude that I can sit at your table caught Jesus' feet, or caught Jesus' attention. It's not meet to give king's bread to the dogs. Jesus said that. And the man said, true, Lord, but even the dogs get the crumbs that fall from the master's table. That caught his attention. I realize where I'm at, but I still want to be in your presence. Realizing who we are and where we're at is a great, I need thee. We used to sing songs like, I need thee. Oh, I need thee. Every hour, I need thee. We need God. So it comes down to this. Who do we welcome? Who do we welcome into our little inner circle? In Bible times, these poor, the maimed, the lame, if you had leprosy in the Bible, in Bible times, when we read Scripture, in those days, lepers were forced, if you were walking down the street, the leper had to cross the street and go to the other side of the street, and he had to yell, unclean, 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 so that you wouldn't get close to him. It's kind of like the coronavirus now, you know. You got to, man, if you get the coronavirus, you got to lock down for 14, it's like leprosy. You got to lock down for 14 days. You got to tell grandma and aunt and uncle and everybody around you, and you got to quit going to school, and you can't go to work. It's like you got the plague, like you got leprosy. It's what it was like back then. Those people were not invited to anything. Jesus said, invite those folks. Because it all boils down to Micah 6 and 8. This is what we've been working on all this month. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee. Two things God's required of us, folks. To do justly, to love mercy, and thirdly, to walk humbly before God. God has asked us, called us, begged us, if you will, given us an example of walking humbly. Because our relationship with other people is affected when we do justly and love mercy. Micah's words, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, and we're going to be done because it's time to quit. Micah's words draws attention to the danger of taking ourselves too seriously. Proud people not only portray themselves as grand heroes, but their image is also more important than reality. When my image becomes more important than what's real, I have a real danger of being so proud. And that's what it all boils down to. We cannot, you cannot, I cannot, we cannot afford to be so proud that we can't yield ourselves to what God wants from us. God wants us to walk humbly, submissive. Pride is the greatest detriment to being a Christian, in my estimation. Because if we cannot humble ourselves and submit ourselves to God's plan, then God can't do anything with us beyond what He started, the work that He started. And the Bible said that we need to understand that He is well able to finish what He started in us if we are able to allow Him to. We've got to allow Him to finish that. How do we do that? We break down that outer shell of pride. We break down that outer shell of our self-aggrandizement and self-importance. And we realize that in order for God to use me, it's often amazing to me. I see we have folks, let's stand, and this is the last thing I am going to tell you. We've got folks in our movement in the United Pentecostal Church, and we look at them and we think, man, what great people, what amazing people, how marvelous their ministries are. And when you get them in small settings and they begin to talk to you about their ministry, we find out that they have tragic, sometimes major problems in their lives and with their children and with their grandchildren. We've had people who've held national offices for years whose children were drug addicts, and they had to take their grandchildren into their home and raise their grandchildren because, and I haven't been given the permission to share who some of those people are. We've got folks that are leaders who have debilitating problems that we didn't even know they had. Physical issues and things that are going on in their lives that they never complain about. You never hear them talk about those things. They just walk with God and serve God and submit themselves to God. And then when you're in some small, private little setting where they feel like it's safe to be able to let down and tell you what's going on, man, you find out, my God, the cross that they carry sometimes keeps us humble. Paul sought God 3 times to deliver him from a thorn in his flesh. That quite possibly, if that thorn were ever lifted from him, who knows what Paul would have done. God knows what we're going through. And He knows where we're at in our lives. And if we will allow Him, the things sometimes that happen to us, God uses to mold us and make us so that we can love mercy, do justly, and walk humbly. Because I said this Thursday night. How many of you were not here Thursday? Who wasn't here Thursday? When we're walking with God, there's only 2 places that we are in our life, in our walk with God. Either we're in a place where God can bless us, or we're in a place where God is teaching us to get ready so He can bless us. All of the trials, all of the things that we go through, those are teaching moments with God. Those are places that Joseph went through to get him to the point where he could be what God wanted him to be. And so sometimes God places us in those teaching moments, keep us humble. Because he can't bless us unless we walk humbly before him. It's 10 till. I went way too long. I apologize. Coffee shop's open. See if you know somebody, pray or shake their hand, bump their elbow, whatever. God bless you. Thank you for staying awake and being attentive this morning.